You know, we've talked about why you should plant food plots, where, how, when, and so on. But what I want to talk about is some of the most common mistakes that people have in planting food plots. And this is speaking from experience. Probably the most common mistake that I see anywhere throughout the United States is people have a tendency to bury these clover seeds and these legume seeds too deep. These seeds have to be less than a ½ inch deep. So if you till up your plot and you broadcast that seed and you come back over the top of that with a disc or even a log pulled behind a four-wheeler to cover that seed, you're going to bury it and it's not coming up. You have to take something that's extremely lightweight, such as a chain link fence, maybe a bed spring, something like that, that is going to just barely cover the seed. If it's over a ½ inch deep, it's not coming up. You know, a second area that I see people fail in with their food plots is ignoring the fact that they need to take a soil test. We hear people say, you know, well, I'm planting in an area where the farmer planted corn or he planted soybeans, so it's got to be good soil. That isn't necessarily the case. Many agricultural crops, such as corn, soybeans, wheat, rye, and so on, are able to grow in low pH soils where legume plants, and many times what we're planting for deer, such as clovers or alfalfas, chicory, they're not able to grow in a low pH soil. So don't ignore that step. Take a soil test, specifically check the pH, and make sure that your pH is at a 7 or right in that area, and you're going to be successful with food plots. If not, don't look for great results. You know, I think it's human instinct to think more is always better, and that's not necessarily the case with food plots. If the manufacturer's calling for 300 pounds per acre of a certain type of fertilizer, I would stick pretty doggone close to those recommendations. Certain fertilizers can burn plants and kill them, so if you would double that or maybe even go 1/2 times as much fertilizer, you run the risk of killing your existing plot. Another thing with the seed, if a manufacturer is recommending 7 to 8 pounds of seed per acre, it's not going to hurt to go slightly over that, but to go double that is just not fiscally necessary. If you take a square foot of soil, there's only a certain amount of nutrition or nutrients in that soil to feed a certain amount of plants. So if you double the seed or triple the seed, what happens is you run into a survival of the fittest type scenario. You're only going to have a certain number of seeds that can grow on that square foot or square yard of soil. So stick close to the manufacturer's recommendations on both fertilizer and seed. When I look at planting opportunities or planting windows, I think of basically 2 different times. In the upper north, northeast, upper Midwest, I think of spring planting basically can take place anytime after the frost leaves the ground up until about the 1st of June. If you start trying to slide those spring plantings into June and July, you run the great risk of lack of rainfall and intense heat, and neither of which are conducive to growing young plants. So in the spring, that's basically what you're looking at for a window after the frost leaves up until about the 1st of June. Then again in the fall, anytime in the month of August up till Labor Day, maybe even up till September 15th, and that's going to vary some. The thing to keep in mind is that you want to plant and allow those plants 30 to at least 40 days prior to those plants receiving a frost. And that will allow them to establish a pretty good root system and carry them on through the winter months. So if you're in the deep south, you may be able to plant up until the 1st November. It's all going to be dependent. Just try to give those plants 30, if not 40 days before the frost. It seems that in the last few years we've had a ton of people wanting to plant things in shaded areas. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do in basically a straight shaded area. When you are looking at planting a food plot, try to think of an area that's going to give you or get at least 3 to 4 hours of sunlight a day. This is a great example where I'm standing. I'm basically in a mature forest. The sun is almost directly overhead, and there's no sun getting down here to the ground. So I'm just wasting my money if I'm going to try to plant something here. I could remedy this situation with a chainsaw and open up some of this area to sunlight, but other than that, there's not a lot I can do. So bear in mind when you're planting or looking to establish a food plot, get an area that's going to have some sunlight in it, at least 3 to 4 hours a day. Another common mistake that I have found over the years is people don't put enough lime on their fields. When you take a soil test and you find out what you need to do to raise your pH up to a 7.0, you're going to find out that you're probably going to have to add tons of lime instead of pounds. And make sure you add the correct amount. I'll give you an example. On our research facility in northwest Wisconsin, we had fields that had pHs as low as a 4.6. In order to bring the pH up to a 7, we had to add over 12 tons of lime per acre. Needless to say, we did it and we were raising some tremendous food plots. But if we wouldn't have, we probably would be just wasting the seed and fertilizer that we'd be putting out. So whereas with fertilizer generally you'll be adding pounds, maybe anywhere from 150 to 300 pounds of fertilizer per acre, lime is different. You're going to have to add several ton. Lime is also different than fertilizer in that once you add that lime, how many ever tons it's calling for, you don't have to do that every year. You probably aren't going to have to recheck your pH for anywhere from 6 to 10 years. And at that point, you may find out that the pH has dropped some, but you're not going to have to go back and reapply another 10 or 12 tons of lime. And when I talk about 10 and 12 tons, that's agricultural lime. If you're using pelletized lime, which is a little bit more expensive but very easy to handle, you can probably cut those rates almost in half.